Now, in this third video, I will proceed in discussing the age of enlightenment. So, enlightenment means century of the enlightened. Enlightenment, also known as the age of reason. So, this enlightenment movement developed in France, Germany, and other parts of the Europe. It only lasted from 1685 to 1815. So in this time, it is more on religious and anti-religious innovation. So now let's proceed to the age of enlightenment. So European politics, philosophy, science, and communications were radically reoriented during the course of the long 18th century, from 1685 to 1815. As part of a movement referred to by its participant as the Age of Reason, or simply means the Enlightenment. So Enlightenment thinkers in Britain, in France, and throughout Europe questioned traditional authority and embraced the notion that humanity could be improved through rational change. So in this Enlightenment, they say that humanity could be improved or enhanced or developed through rational change. The Enlightenment produced numerous books, essays, inventions, scientific discoveries, laws, wars, and revolutions. So we could say through this that the Enlightenment have produced so much. Okay, the American and French revolutions were directly inspired by Enlightenment ideals and respectively marked the peak of its influence and the beginning of its decline. The Enlightenment ultimately gave way to 19th century Romanticism. So here are the three Enlightenment. We have first is the early Enlightenment in the year 1685 to 1730. Second is the High Enlightenment from 1730 to 1780. Lastly is we have the Late Enlightenment and beyond. So this is from 1780 to 1815. But first, let's discuss the early Enlightenment. So we have the Enlightenment's important 17th century precursors included the Englishman Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes, the Frenchman René Descartes, and the key natural philosophers of the scientific revolution, including Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Its roots are usually traced to 1680s England, wherein the span of 3 years. Isaac Newton published his Principia Mathematica in the year 1686, and John Locke his essay concerning human understanding in the year 1689. Two works that provided the scientific, mathematical, and philosophical toolkit for the Enlightenment's major advances. So through these two works made by Isaac Newton and John Locke have made advances in the Enlightenment. Locke argued that human nature was mutable and that knowledge was gained through accumulated experience rather than by assessing some sort of outside truth. So based on John Locke, that the knowledge of a person is gained through our experiences. We could say that those experiences that we have, we gain knowledge from it. And Newton's calculus and optical theories provided the powerful Enlightenment metaphors for precisely measured change and illumination. There was no single unified enlightenment. Instead, it is possible to speak of the French Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, and the English, German, Swiss, or American Enlightenment. Individual Enlightenment thinkers often had very different approaches. So these Enlightenment individual thinkers have different approach in this Enlightenment. So Locke differed from David Hume, Jean-Jacques Rousseau from Voltaire, Thomas Jefferson from Frederick the Great. Their differences and disagreements, though, emerge out of common Enlightenment themes of rational questioning and belief in progress through dialogue. So let's further explain in the early Enlightenment period was from 1685 to 1730. So Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes started the Enlightenment movement. So these two persons started the early Enlightenment, Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes. So the early Enlightenment was based on the scientific revolution. So the scientific revolution was used in early times periods to introduce the idea of modern science. One of the main influences of modern science was Isaac Newton. So Isaac Newton was one of the main influences of modern science because he invented gravity. So, in short, the early Enlightenment is more on scientific revolution in which Isaac Newton has influenced the modern science. So now let's proceed with the High Enlightenment in the year 1730 to 1780. Centered on the dialogues and publications of the French philosophies Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, Buffon, and Denis Diderot, the High Enlightenment might best be summed up by one historian's summary of Voltaire's Philosophically Dictionary, a chaos of clear ideas. Foremost among these was the notion that everything in the universe could be rationally demystified and catalogued. The signature publication of the period was Diderot's Encyclopedia, 1751 from 77, which brought together leading authors to produce an ambitious compilation of human knowledge. It was an age of enlightened despots like Frederick the Great, who unified, rationalized, and modernized Prussia in between brutal multi-year wars with Austria, and of enlightened would-be revolutionaries like Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, whose Declaration of Independence in the year 1776 framed the American Revolution in terms taken from of Locke's essays. It was also a time of religious and anti-religious, like I said. Enlightenment is the times of religious and anti-religious innovation. So as Christians sought to reposition their faith along rational lines, and theists and materialistics argued that the universe seemed to determine its own course without God's intervention. Locke, along with French philosopher Pierre Bailly, began to champion the idea of the separation of church and state. Secret societies like the Freemasons, the Bavarian Illuminati, and the Rosicrucians flourished, offering European men and a few women new modes of fellowship, esoteric ritual, and mutual assistance. In these times, it is where it began Locke and Pierre Bailly to separate the idea of church and state. So, okay. Coffee houses, newspapers, and literary salons emerge a new venues for ideas to circulate. So these places was being the new venues for these philosophers or thinkers to create ideas. So now let's explain more of the High Enlightenment. So philosophers of the Enlightenment were Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire. Thomas Hobbes believed that one person should have absolute power due to the thought that all humans were claimed to be selfish and evil. So that's based on Thomas Hobbes. And John Locke believed all humans were born with natural rights. The three were life. So according to John Locke, that we are born with natural rights, and that is life, liberty, and property. Montesquieu believed that the government takes your three natural rights and uses them against you. He had the idea of separation of powers. That is why, like I've said lately, that he separated the church and the state. So Rousseau, on the other hand, believed that there should be a contract between government and people, which is called social contract. Voltaire believed the government has to be separate from religion. He thought this would lead to greater tolerance in society. Okay, so lastly, in the topic of enlightenment, we have the late Enlightenment and beyond. This is in the year 1780 to 1815. So the French Revolution of 1789 was the culmination of the High Enlightenment vision of throwing out the old authorities to remake society along rational lines. But it devolved into bloody terror that showed the limits of its own ideas and led, a decade later, to the rise of Napoleon. So in the late Enlightenment, it is where it falls over in a bloody terror. It shows in the picture. And it is in the rise of Napoleon. So still, its goal of egalitarianism, or from the simple word equality, attracted the admiration of the early feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, mother of Frankenstein author Mary Shelley, and inspired both the heightened war of independence and the radical racial inclusivism of Paraguay's first post-independence government. Enlightened rationality gave way to the wildness of Romanticism, but 19th century liberalism and classicism, not to mention 20th century's modernisms, all owe a heavy debt to the thinkers of the Enlightenment. So, in the Enlightenment and beyond, it impacted the world in many ways. It created religious tolerance, equality, the development of scientific theories, and the concepts of liberty. So in this Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, it brought advances, it brought scientific methods, scientific revolutions in today's generations. So we owe everything from the past in the Enlightenment, especially those philosophers, those thinkers who contributed meaningful well in revolutionizing and developing of this system. So we could say that throughout this Enlightenment, from the early into the late, there are developments.